Hi, I'm M. Lavora Perry, your friendly neighborhood Nichiren Buddhist. So today I'm going to be talking about the relationship between the Soka Gakkai International, or the SGI, and the worldwide calamities we are experiencing today. So I'm going to start out with a question. Question: according to Nichiren Buddhism, is the Soka Gakkai slander of the Lotus Sutra the cause of our current worldwide calamities, including the COVID-19 pandemic, natural disasters, and domestic and foreign terrorism, unrest, and war? The answer is yes. Now, I'm speaking specifically to members of the SGI who believe that the organization is a benevolent one. However, in case there are people watching this video who are unfamiliar with Buddhism or unfamiliar with Nichiren Buddhism or the SGI, I'm going to give you a little background. So I am a Nichiren Buddhist. As such, I believe in the teachings of the Lotus Sutra, which was the second to the last teaching of the man most commonly known as the Buddha, which means an awakened human being. The Buddha lived about 2,500 years ago in India, and a Buddha is someone who is awakened to the eternal, limitless, and boundless nature of their own life. Someone awakened to their true eternal self. So the given name of the Buddha was Siddhartha, and one of his honorific names was Shakyamuni, which means man of the Shakya clan, or sage, wise man of the Shakya clan. So Nichiren was a 13th century Japanese monk who propagated the practice of chanting the title of the Lotus Sutra. And the main reason was because in the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha said that sutra was his foremost sutra, and that it was superior to any sutra he had preached in the past, any sutra he was preaching at that time currently, and any sutra he would preach in the future. And he preached one more before he died. So it's the only sutra in which the Buddha himself said, "This is my number one teaching." So Nichiren propagated the practice of chanting the title in Japanese. The title of the Lotus Sutra in Japanese is Myoho Renge Kyo, which literally translates as the wonderful law of the lotus flower teaching of the Buddha. And Nichiren put Nam in front of that. Nam is a Sanskrit word from India, which means devotion. So Nichiren propagated the practice of chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And Nichiren Buddhists chant that every day as our daily practice. That's how we pray. And essentially it means devotion to the Lotus Sutra. So I've practiced Nichiren Buddhism for over 30 years. However, I do not believe, as Nichiren believed, that a person must believe in a certain religion or philosophy to lead a happy and fulfilling life. And Nichiren really believed this very strongly, that Nam Myoho Renge Kyo was the only way to happiness, or enlightenment, which is another way of saying an awakened human being. So he believed that. I don't. However, I do believe in the Lotus Sutra, which Nichiren employed his followers to follow even more than they followed the teachings of Nichiren. He said, hey, above all, the Lotus Sutra is it. Everything I'm teaching I got from the Lotus Sutra. So don't take my word for it. Read the sutra yourself. See what the sutra says yourself. And that's what I did. And so in doing that, I came to believe that the whole purpose of the Lotus Sutra is the golden rule: to do to others as you would have done to yourself, to respect yourself, and in kind respect all others in all environments. And this practice is actually the only practice that's described clearly in the Lotus Sutra, except for the practice of reading, writing, transcribing, and teaching the Lotus Sutra, which the Buddha repeatedly said, that practitioners of the Lotus Sutra should do that. In addition, he described a particular practice for people to do whether they did those other things or not. So like the essential practice of the Lotus Sutra is the Golden Rule, and it's described in chapter 20 of the Lotus Sutra. And so the purpose of me talking today isn't to get people to believe this particular belief. It's what I believe. And if you read the Lotus Sutra, you can come to your own understanding of it. It's what I came to understand through reading the Lotus Sutra. And if you read the sutra and other sutras, because the Lotus Sutra was the Buddha's second to last one. He preached many more. He preached for 40 years. They began saying, this is what I heard. And then the sutra begins. The person who heard the Buddha say these things begins to say what he heard. So in my reading of the Lotus Sutra, what I just described as my golden rule philosophy, that's what I heard that's what I hear when I read the Lotus Sutra. And the chapter that describes this is chapter 20, which is titled Never Disparaging, Bodhisattva Never Disparaging. So a Bodhisattva is a person who believes that their own happiness can only be achieved by helping other people be happy, which dovetails into the Buddhist philosophy of oneness, which is, I am not separate from you. So if I help you be happy, I'm helping myself be happy. So in the Bodhisattva disparaging chapter, the Buddha told a story about this man who would go up to everybody he met and say, I would never disparage you, because you are certain to become a Buddha. And he said it to everybody. I would never disparage you, which means to disrespect, because you are certain to become a Buddha. So he did this to everybody until he began to annoy people. And a lot of people began to feel like, who are you to tell me that I'm going to become a Buddha? You think you're better than I am. And this irritated people to the point that they started, some of them started throwing rocks and tiles at him. They began to attack him for saying it, really saying that you're so arrogant, you think you're better than other people. And they would chase him. And because Bodhisattva never disparaging, because this Bodhisattva would always say this, he gained the nickname of Never Disparaging. So the Bodhisattva Never Disparaging, when people started throwing rocks and tiles at him, because he didn't disparage his own life and he wanted to protect his own life, he would run. But then from a distance where he couldn't get hurt, he would say, I would never disparage you because you're certain to become a Buddha. So he never stopped his practice, even when he was threatened, even at the risk of his own life. So because he continued this for a very long time, continued doing this practice, he eventually became a Buddha. After the Buddha told this story, he said, guess who the Bodhisattva Never Disparaging was? It was me. So the Buddha really described his own practice in that chapter, and I've taken it on as my practice. I try to never disparage people. I fail so many times. It's like, this is my lifelong practice. I fail, I try again. I fail, I try again. But it is my core belief. Nichiren also believed this. Even though he propagated the practice of chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, this is what he said in one of his letters, which Nichiren wrote a lot. He wrote a lot of letters to his followers. He wrote a lot of letters to the government, because the government was tied in with religion, and he was trying to say, no, you're preventing people from practicing the Lotus Sutra. Disassociate yourself with those teachings that go against the Lotus Sutra. And he wrote a lot of letters to his priests, who were his disciples, who also taught on his behalf. So this letter is titled The Three Kinds of Treasure. And so this, for me anyway, I don't know what you think, to me, this is proof that, I'm not just making something up about saying, I follow the golden rule of Bodhisattva Never Disparaging's practice. Nichiren said in The Three Kinds of Treasures, the heart of the Buddha's lifetime of teachings is the Lotus Sutra. And the heart of the practice of the Lotus Sutra is found in the Never Disparaging chapter. I'm just going to read that one more time. The heart of the Buddha's lifetime of teachings is the Lotus Sutra. And the heart of the practice of the Lotus Sutra is found in the Never Disparaging chapter. So Nichiren, I'm good with that. I feel like I'm doing what he said. And also it works for me to really base my life on the practice of never disparaging. Other than the fact that, as is taught in the Lotus Sutra, I believe that enlightenment or absolute happiness is equally open to all. And again, that's like the main point of the Lotus Sutra, that enlightenment is open to all, which it's, you know, a big reason why I don't believe it's only open to people who chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. So, but other than not believing that everybody has to chant, I agree with and follow the core teachings of Nichiren and Nichiren Buddhism. So what that means is that I follow the core teachings of the Lotus Sutra, because Nichiren was all about the Lotus Sutra. He himself said, I did not start a new kind of Buddhism. I'm just telling you what it says in the Lotus Sutra. Because at that time in Japan, people had gotten away from what it says in the Lotus Sutra. So it was like, let's get back on track. And that was his belief. So he considered himself a proponent, a disciple of the Lotus Sutra. Again, and he said, you should follow the sutra even if you don't follow what I teach. Go back to the source. So back to the point of this video. The SGI claims to follow the Lotus Sutra and Nichiren. However, in fact, the organization doesn't. So I contend that based on what's taught in the sutras, the Buddhist teachings, the fact that the SGI masquerades as an organization based on the teaching that the Buddha himself said was the highest one, the Lotus Sutra, based on the fact that the SGI pretends to be based on the Lotus Sutra, when actually it's not, our planet has been thrown into chaos. So from a non-Buddhist perspective, this isn't magical thinking. If you ascribe to the idea that the whole purpose of Buddhism is to treat all people equally, to treat all people with respect, then when on a massive level, those things are not taking place. When the planet's being disrespected, when human beings are disrespecting each other, you're going to throw everything out of whack. And so I'm going to explain how the SGI is related to what's happening to this, to us being really out of whack. And the primary thing that the SGI is doing wrong is, instead of relying on the Lotus Sutra and Nichiren's teachings, which point back to the Lotus Sutra, the SGI is relying on the teachings of its international president, Daisaku Ikeda. And that's the main problem with the SGI. And I will just shed some light on that problem in various ways in this video. Devout SGI members are not practicing Nichiren Buddhism. They are practicing Daisaku Ikedaism. And nothing's inherently wrong with that if they just say, hey, we're Daisaku Ikeda Buddhist. But that's not what they do. SGI members, Ikedaists, claim to be followers of Nichiren and practitioners of the Lotus Sutra. And by making this claim, they're committing grave slander of the Lotus Sutra. And as I said, this slander is rippling out into the planet. And I'm repeating myself because it bears repeating. It's really important. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to provide different text from the Lotus Sutra and Nichiren, illustrating what I'm saying. So recently, an SGI member told me that on Facebook, he said that if someone had given him a copy of the Lotus Sutra 40 years ago, he wouldn't have understood it. This person told me that he learns from Daisaku Ikeda because Ikeda understands Buddhism better than he does. This is a paraphrase of what he told me, not an exact quote. So reliance on Daisaku Ikeda's superior knowledge of the Lotus Sutra and Buddhism is the reason that most members who've talked to me about the issues I'm raising in this video have given me for not basing their lives on reading and studying the Lotus Sutra itself. So in other words, he's not the only one. Many members have, the members I've talked to about this have said, what's wrong with learning for somebody who knows more than you? Why, the Lotus Sutra is too hard to read. It's like reading a foreign language. I would never get it. So I need Daisaku Ikeda to tell me what it says. In a writing titled How Those Initially Aspiring to the Way Can Attain Buddhahood Through the Lotus Sutra, and in other writings, Nichiren admonished people who claimed the Lotus Sutra is too difficult to understand. So what he did is in this writing, he pretended like he was someone asking Nichiren a question. So Nichiren pretended to be asking himself a question, and then Nichiren answered that question. So, starting out as the questioner, Nichiren says, question, the Lotus Sutra says, quote, the door to this wisdom is difficult to understand and difficult to enter, end quote. The persons of our time cite this passage to argue that the Lotus Sutra is not fitted to the capacities of the people. And this seems very reasonable. What's your opinion? And this is the answer that Nichiren gave. Such an assertion is quite unfounded. The reason is because it's put forward by persons who have not grasped the true meaning of this sutra. So 40 years ago, when this person who I talked to, when he started practicing 40 years ago, had the SGI placed the Lotus Sutra and Nichiren's writings in the center of its study efforts, every member who values study would have been well versed in it by now. Relying on Daisaku Ikeda's interpretations of the Lotus Sutra has kept most SGI members at the preschool through master's degree level of Lotus Sutra study, while maintaining Ikeda's status as a postdoc. Relying on Daisaku Ikeda's interpretations has crippled members as students of the Lotus Sutra, not enabled them to advance in learning it. This is the opposite of what a great teacher does. A great teacher teaches his or her students to surpass them, not to remain dependent on them. Like a baby who grows up into a teenager and a man and never stops breastfeeding. Gross. In the Expedient Means chapter of the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha states, at the start, I took a vow, hoping to make all persons equal to me without any distinction between us. Again, in the Expedient Means chapter of the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha states, at the start, I took a vow, hoping to make all persons equal to me without any distinction between us. So here, the Buddha laid out how a teacher teaches, because that's what the Buddha was ultimately. He was a teacher, preacher, teacher, he taught. So right there, he describes his method of teaching, to set forth to make all the people that he taught equal to him completely, with no distinctions between them. Now, Ikeda has been the Soka Gakkai president, or honorary president, since 1960. And has consistently failed to embody the Buddha's unambiguous declaration of how a true teacher teaches. Therefore, after all these years, it's reasonable to deduce that making all members equal to him was never Ikeda's goal. Nor is it the goal of SGI leaders who all hope to wield the same power over members as Ikeda. Now, if you're an SGI leader and you honestly, that's not what you're trying to do, is to lord it over members, then I'm not talking to you. But I'm talking to those who do that, and there's plenty. And I'm talking about Daisaku Ikeda, but actually he's like 92 years old, if he's still alive. He hasn't been seen in public in over 10 years, since before I stopped practicing, which was over 10 years ago. SGI members don't question this, which is just weird. And so who knows whether he's bedridden or not even alive anymore. So at this point, the SGI is beyond just the power of Daisaku Ikeda. It's become like a Daisaku Ikeda machine, so that even in his death or infirm or whatever's going on right now, this machine keeps chugging along, lording it over members. The leaders who hope to one day ascend to the throne of Daisaku Ikeda, people like that, religious teachers like that, are described in the Lotus Sutra's Encouraging Devotion chapter. And that chapter has a verse section in which practitioners of the Lotus Sutra vow to reappear in the future in the latter day of the law, which is a time that starts 2,500 years after the Buddha died, and is described in the Lotus Sutra as a time of great peril where the world is just consumed with evil. But the great thing about this time, which is still our time, the latter day began, as I said, a little bit before Nichiren was born and has continued on. It's supposed to continue on for 10,000 years and more. It's not just a bad time. It's a time when these practitioners who vowed to protect the law and to create a peaceful world by protecting the law promised to show up and do that. So in the part of the Lotus Sutra, in the verse section of the Encouraging Devotion chapter, they begin to describe what that age is going to be like and the enemies that will try to prevent them from protecting the Lotus Sutra, the enemies who will actually be trying to destroy the heart of the Lotus Sutra, which is this idea of equality, equal access to true happiness, nobody above another person. So they describe three enemies. And the acts of the leaders in the SGI who hope to one day, become Ikeda-like, they correspond to the second of these three enemies. And they are described this way in the Encouraging Devotion chapter. In that evil age, there will be monks with perverse wisdom and hearts that are fawning and crooked, who will suppose they have attained what they have not attained, being proud and boastful in heart. So they're very arrogant. Not only that, they're fawning. Fawning means they kiss ass. And so like when you see these people, these kinds of people, they're like again, trying to, scurry behind, President Ikeda and other top leaders above them, like, yes, sir, yes, master, yes, master, yes, master, like that. And here I want to make something clear, because I'm going to talk about the three powerful enemies again. They aren't like devils or some special kind of evil person. They represent this nature within all of us that kind of clouds over our true identity as eternally happy Buddhas. So they represent the struggle within all of us to not give in to our lesser selves, our arrogance, our looking down on other people. This is something I know personally I have to fight all the time, and even just fighting the idea that I'm fighting against my arrogance, so I'm better than you. So I'm not saying all SGI leaders are like that. The ones who are like that, and they don't even have to stay that way. They can decide, okay, I don't want to be that kind of person anymore. I don't want to act like the second powerful enemy anymore. And that's it. That's just us always, making the decision that I'm going to become the kind of person I really want to be. We can always do that at any moment, decide to change. So the SGI implicitly teaches that Ikeda's status as a superior human being is unattainable by any person alive today. They think of him as like the true Buddha of the latter day, as if the Buddha wasn't just an awakened human being, but like some kind of God. And that's what the SGI members, the devout ones who have totally drank the Kool-Aid, believe that the SGI, Daisaku Ikeda, is a God. That's how they treat him. And this goes against the Lotus Sutra, obviously, because the Lotus Sutra is about equality, and also specifically teaches not to do just that, not to deify another human. So this is illustrated in a quote that Nichiren provided, really admonishing us to study the Lotus Sutra above all. And that's in a letter titled On Repaying Debts of Gratitude. And he in this letter, he really breaks down what it looks like when you're not doing as the Buddha instructed regarding this. So he says, Nichiren, quote, in a scripture called the Nirvana Sutra, which was the last sutra that the Buddha preached. And in the Nirvana Sutra, he essentially said, everything I said in the Lotus Sutra, that was true. So again, back to the quote from On Repaying Debts of Gratitude. In a scripture called the Nirvana Sutra, the Buddha says, quote, rely on the law and not upon persons, end quote. And then Nichiren goes on to say, relying on the law here means relying on the various sutras. Not relying on persons means not relying on persons other than the Buddha. I'm going to read all that again because it's one of those things that goes to the whole heart of what I'm saying. Nichiren begins in this quote from On Repaying Debts of Gratitude. Quote, in a scripture called the Nirvana Sutra, the Buddha says, quote, rely on the law and not upon persons, end quote. Relying on the law here means relying on the various sutras. Not relying on persons means not relying on persons other than the Buddha. That's real clear. Not relying on Daisaku Ikeda to teach you the Lotus Sutra, but going to the source, to the Buddha himself, and relying on the teaching that he taught, the Lotus Sutra. So SGI members say they can't do. They need to rely on Daisaku Ikeda in order to get there. So if you sincerely believe as an SGI member that the organization has followed the example of the Buddha to make all persons equal to him, and if you sincerely believe the SGI is following the Buddha's instruction to rely on the law and not upon persons, then nothing I say in this video will seem correct to you. You will come up with all kinds of reasons to contradict what is obvious to anyone but ride or die SGI members. The SGI treats Daisaku Ikeda like a god. In addition, the Soka Gakkai Dictionary of Buddhism defines the 7 disasters like this. The 7 disasters, and here I want you to really pay attention to the 7 disasters. I want you to think in your mind what they remind you of. The 7 disasters are said to be caused by slander of the correct Buddhist teaching. In the Benevolent King Sutra, they are 1. Extraordinary changes of the sun and moon. 2. Extraordinary changes of the stars and planets. 3. Fires. 4. Unseasonable floods. 5. Storms. 6. Drought. And 7. War, including enemy attacks from without and rebellion from within. The Medicine Master Sutra defines the 7 disasters as 1. Pestilence. And in case you're not sure what pestilence is an epidemic like COVID-19. Foreign invasion, internal strife, extraordinary changes in the heavens, solar and lunar eclipses, unseasonable storms, drought, which leads to fires. The 7 disasters are often cited together with the three calamities in Nichiren's work as the three calamities and seven disasters. So, I have some questions for SGI members. If you believe that the correct teaching your dictionary speaks of is the Lotus Sutra, and you believe, as I do, that the disasters and calamities described in the sutras are occurring right now, what great slander of the correct teaching is causing them? What great slander of the Lotus Sutra is causing all the chaos we see in our world today? So here I'm making some assumptions. I'm assuming that you do believe that the calamities are occurring today. And I'm assuming that as a Buddhist, you recognize that what's going on in the environment is a reflection of what's going on internally. And as a Buddhist, as a Nichiren Buddhist, as a Buddhist of the Lotus Sutra, you believe that fundamentally what goes on in Buddhism impacts the immediate environment and the environment in whole. And you believe that this is the latter day of the law, when the law is going to be threatened. And this is the time when practitioners of the law will stand up and defend it. Now, if you don't believe those things, then there's nothing, I'm not talking to you. You can just turn the video off. If you don't believe that what I just said, then you don't believe in Nichiren Buddhism and the Lotus Sutra, because that's what it says. So, but if you do believe that the times of peril didn't end with Nichiren, or didn't end when Japan, when the Soka Gakkai faced the Japanese government during World War II, which, by the way, who knows what actually happened then? Because when you read when I've read older books that were written before the ones that are out now, and they say one thing, and then later books by the SGI say something completely different. So we don't even know the true history. That was one of the reasons I left the SGI. Many, but they all really kind of dovetail into everything I'm saying now. But what's up? How come, in terms of detailing what happened back then, what actually happened? But in any case, that was supposed to be the big time when the SGI, challenged the third powerful enemies and preserved the Lotus Sutra. And then supposedly it happened again in 1992 when the organization was excommunicated from the priesthood, and there was like this rebirth of Buddhism. So of Nichiren Buddhism, of the Lotus Sutra. So I'm asking, was that it? Are we done? Latter day of the law is over. So now the calamities and disasters we see today have nothing to do with Buddhism? Or is it true what it said in the Benevolent Kings Sutra? That the thing that causes what we're seeing today is slander of the correct Buddhist teaching. And if that's true, who's slandering it? Since these are the worst times ever in the latter day of the law, or in the history of humankind, for that matter, where is the third powerful enemy described in the encouraging devotion chapter of the Lotus Sutra? Where is he? Oh, it could be a woman. But where is this person who's supposed to be appearing right now? Or again, do you not believe that? Let's see what the third powerful enemy is supposed to look like. This is my Lotus Sutra. It was translated by Burton Watson and published by Columbia University Press. Here's how the third powerful enemy is described in the verse section of the encouraging devotion chapter of the Lotus Sutra. So before I read this description, I want to say, don't get caught up on how the third powerful enemy dressed or where the third powerful enemy lived, but pay attention to how the third powerful enemy is described as behaving. The actions of the third powerful enemy are what matter. Or there will be forest-dwelling monks wearing clothing of patched rags and living in retirement, who will claim they are practicing the true way, despising and looking down on all humankind, greedy for profit and support. They will preach the law to white-robed laymen and will be respected and revered by the world as though they were arhats who possess the 6 transcendental powers. So in other words, these people living in retirement, like Daisaku Ikeda, who's been retired for over 10 years and just invisible, they're revered as living saints, arhats who possess the 6 transcendental powers. Arhats were Buddhists who developed like this really higher state of being, and these 6 transcendental powers were at the time in the way they're talked about here were thought to be like supernatural powers beyond what a normal person could do. So they were revered like, really special, glowing kind of godlike human beings. So that's what they're saying. This third powerful enemy will be treated like that, will be seen like that, like a walking saint, okay? A living, breathing saint or God. Another question. What Buddhist organization is slandering the Lotus Sutra right now by relying on a person, the teachings of its international president, Daisaku Ikeda, instead of relying directly on reading and studying the Lotus Sutra, which is what both Nichiren and the Sutra say the organization should do as a community that is based, supposedly, on the Lotus Sutra? I'm going to ask that question again. What Buddhist organization is slandering the Lotus Sutra right now by relying on a person, the teachings of its international president, Daisaku Ikeda, instead of relying directly on reading and studying the Lotus Sutra, which is both what the Sutra and Nichiren say the organization should do as a community that claims to be based on the Lotus Sutra? Here's another description of the third powerful enemy, beyond what I said before. They're greedy. Suck people, suck whatever they can out of people for their own profit and gain. These men with evil in their hearts, constantly thinking of worldly affairs, will borrow the name of forest-dwelling monks and take delight in proclaiming our faults. So another aspect of the third powerful enemy, besides being greedy and taking advantage of people for their own wealth, which, by the way, Daisaku Ikeda has written numerous books, well over 100. Guess who buys most of them? SGI members. Guess who pours money into the organization thinking that they're going to get blessings from doing that? SGI members. And guess who's made Daisaku Ikeda rich by all their donations and buying various, all these books that nobody else really buys like SGI members buy? Daisaku Ikeda. He's a rich man. The Soka Gakkai has houses in different countries around the world that are reserved just for him. Nobody's living in the houses. They're there so that when President Ikeda comes into town, he has a place to live. Now, at least that was the case when I was a member. Maybe they've sold the houses. Maybe they're being used for something else at this point. But I know that when I was practicing, that was the case. So yeah. So the other thing that the third powerful enemy does is go after the true practitioners of the Lotus Sutra. And Encouraging Devotion Chapters describes that behavior like this. These men with evil in their hearts, constantly thinking of worldly affairs, will borrow the name of forest-dwelling monks and take delight in proclaiming our faults, saying things like this. These monks are greedy for profit and support. Now here they're talking about the true practitioners of the law who are actually trying to defend the law from the third powerful enemy. These monks are greedy for profit and support, and therefore they preach non-Buddhist doctrines and fabricate their own scriptures to delude the people of the world. Now see right there, they accuse the true practitioners of making stuff up, when in fact, it's the third powerful enemy that's making things up. That's called projection in psychology, when you accuse people of doing what you're doing. Because they hope to gain fame and renown thereby, they make distinctions when preaching this sutra. And then the practitioners go on to say, because in the midst of the great assembly, the third powerful enemy, they constantly try to defame us. They will address the rulers, high ministers, Brahmins, and housekeepers, as well as other monks, slandering and speaking ill of us. I'm going to wait. So right there, the third powerful enemy is enmeshed in the government. Rulers, that's the government. So, the Soka Gakkai has embedded itself into government institutions. The biggest one being the United Nations, but also forming a political party, the Komeito Party in Japan. Also, Daisaku Ikeda has met with various world leaders. Okay, so I really kind of like oozing into the government. Practitioners of the Lotus Sutra go on to say that the third powerful enemy does this. Slandering and speaking evil of us, saying, these are men of perverted views who preach non-Buddhist doctrines. So once again, claiming that the practitioners who are protecting the law are actually making something up. But because we revere the Buddha, we will bear all these evils. Though they treat us with contempt, saying, you are all no doubt Buddhas, all such words of arrogance and contempt we will endure and accept. In a muddied kalpa, in an evil age, there will be many things to fear. Another question. What Buddhist organization is doing everything I've described so far and claims to have 12 million members worldwide? Now, granted, the SGI has been saying they've had 12 million members since I started practicing in the 80s. So I don't know really, again, this is another one of those things where who knows what's the truth. But what is true is that the SGI is the largest singular Buddhist organization in the world. There are lots of SGI members around the world. And no other Buddhist organization has that big umbrella under it with all these members underneath, giving money, like I said, being duped. So my final question to SGI members is this. What Buddhist organization has so much global power and influence, more than any other Buddhist community has ever had in human history, that when this organization slanders the correct teaching, the effect of that slander causes calamities worldwide? There is no other organization except the Soka Gakkai International that fits all of these descriptions. So in a writing titled The Three Tripitaka Masters Pray for Rain, Nichiren describes what he thinks is important when looking at Buddhism and looking at a particular statement about Buddhism. And he said, in judging the relative merit of Buddhist doctrines, I, Nichiren, believe the best standards are those of reason, documentary proof, And even more valuable than reason and documentary proof is the proof of actual fact. So when Nichiren says documentary proof, he's talking about what's written in the sutras. So what does Nichiren say is the most important consideration when you're thinking about is something true to Buddhism or not? He's saying reason. Does this make sense? He's saying documentary proof. Do the sutras say this is true? And then lastly, actual proof. Is this really what's going on in real life? Can we see evidence of it? Okay? Proof of it. So, since I started writing about this, which was a few months ago, when in studying the Buddhist teachings, I came across a writing from Nichiren that helped me see that the calamities that we're experiencing today are caused by this slander of the correct teaching. And then it was from there, it was just easy to put two and two together. Who's slandering the correct teaching? The Soka Gakkai. So once I realized that, I felt like I had to speak out. And that's what got me to writing a lot on Facebook and a little bit on Quora, and now making this video, because I am a practitioner of the Lotus Sutra. I am one of the Buddhas in the one of the Bodhisattvas in the Encouraging Devotion chapter of the Lotus Sutra, who vowed to protect the sutra at this time. And the reason I know that I'm one of those is because I am defending the Lotus Sutra at this time when it's being threatened. So I repeatedly asked the questions I asked here on Facebook, on Quora, and I keep providing scriptural evidence to support my answers to them, which I've given today. But not one SGI member has answered me when I ask these questions, let alone providing an answer that stands the test of the three proofs. Is reasonable, is supported by Buddhist scripture, and shows up in real life. Instead of answering my questions, SGI members just keep ignoring them or making claims based on their own opinions, not what's written in the Lotus Sutra and in Nichiren's writings. And here I want to stop for a minute. I've had some people, I have one person in particular say, well, I did answer you. You just didn't believe my answer, or you don't understand my answer because your mind is distorted. So here's what I have to say about that. What if I ask you, which one of these crayons is the red crayon? And I have two held up, one red, one green. And you say, that one is, pointing to the green crayon. Then no, you have not answered my question. You've given a wrong answer, which is, by definition, not the answer. So telling me, giving me ghost show quotes that have nothing to do with the questions I'm asking, telling me your own opinion about what's going on in the world, it's because, human beings need a lesson and all these kind of things. That all may be true, but I'm talking about what's in the Lotus Sutra. What do the Buddhist scriptures say? And unless you're providing me proof of that, you're not answering my question. So what SGI members have done when I ask these questions is defend the organization and Daisaku Ikeda, and just ignore, like I said, just ignore the questions I'm asking them about Buddhist scripture and evidence based on it. On Facebook, members have berated me for daring to question the organization and Daisaku Ikeda. Some have said I'm ungrateful to them both. So I want to respond to that. Okay, Nichiren's original teacher, his teacher from when he first started studying Buddhism as a child, and then he went on up, basically going up to high school studying, and then on his own he went to the college level. He went to Kamakura, where the biggest libraries of Buddhism were. But his teacher growing up was Dozenbo. And so eventually, as Nichiren saw that the school that he went to, which was based on Tendai Buddhism, which was based on Tiantai Buddhism, and Tiantai was a Chinese scholar of the Lotus Sutra, he realized that his school, even though it said it was based on the Lotus Sutra, it had mixed in like Japanese traditional religion. So it's all mixed up. And that's what really made him, looking at the state of Japan at the time, as he was learning and getting older and studying Buddhism, he was like, this is a Buddhist country. How come dead people are in the street? dead animals in the street. People are, sick. Everything seemed to be in chaos. And he was like, well, Buddhism's supposed to help people. How come it's not? There must be one unifying teaching that helps people. So that's when he discovered for himself that was the Lotus Sutra. And he actually wrote a long government treatise to the government called On Securing the Peace of the Land Through the Practice of Buddhism. He looked at Japan, which was in the state of chaos like the world is now, and said, well, the problem is people who say they're practicing the Lotus Sutra ain't really practicing. People are saying that this teaching of equality for all that's in the Lotus Sutra is not the highest teaching. Priests are taking advantage of people, got them praying to be giving them money so that when they die, they can be born in the Pure Land, like this heaven kind of place. He's like, oh, this is what's causing the confusion. Now, you may not be a Nichiren Buddhist, which means you don't believe all of that, but this is what Nichiren believed. This is what Nichiren taught. So he wrote on securing the peace of the land when Japan was like the state of the world now, but it's Japan, a little tiny island. Now this is all rippled out into society. So my point was, he went against his teacher. Dozenbo protected Nichiren when he was being attacked. Nichiren was almost killed for saying what he said, because he was going against the third powerful enemy, who was all enmeshed in the government. He was going against government leaders, and he was going against people who really believed in these godlike Buddhist teachers. So he was almost killed. But Dozenbo protected him, and Dozenbo never stopped cherishing him as his student. And eventually, Dozenbo indicated that he came to believe what his student had taught him. So Dozenbo was a true teacher. Nichiren felt, and on repaying debts of gratitude, he describes this, that the best way for a student to show gratitude to a good teacher is if that student learns beyond what the teacher taught, learns that something the teacher taught was incorrect, to go back to their teacher and teach them. So this isn't about being ungrateful to Daisaku Ikeda. If it wasn't for the SGI, I wouldn't know about Nichiren Buddhism. But at this time, when I know that the SGI is going against the heart of the Lotus Sutra, I would be an ungrateful practitioner of the Lotus Sutra if I didn't stand up against the organization. Some SGI members, in response to the things I've been saying, say I'm making things up. Well, we've heard that before. The third powerful enemy said that practitioners of the Lotus Sutra are making things up. The people who attacked the other two powerful enemies said the same thing. One person said to me, please enjoy brewing in your own slander and distorted views of Nichiren's writings. And this person suggested that the reason that I've been speaking out is because I have a grudge against the SGI, because the SGI stopped selling my books in their bookstores. And that's just not true. The SGI stopped selling my books in the bookstores when I started saying things like I'm saying today, and then ultimately quit the organization. So, and now, knowing what I know, I don't want anybody to buy those books, really. The only reason that I keep the picture of one of them, the one that's dearest to my heart, which is my novel, is because the artist who did the artwork is he's a really great artist. It's really great art. But the book, part of it, I write a lot about Daisaku Ikeda in it, and I want to just extract that out. Just like in my other books where in my dedication, I dedicated to Daisaku. I want to extract that out because I don't want to lead people astray. But see, I didn't know that then. So it's not about my books. It's not about me at all. Everything I'm saying is really about what does it say in the Lotus Sutra? What does it say in Nichiren's writings? That's all I'm talking about. And if you show me where I'm incorrect, where what I'm saying isn't in the Lotus Sutra and isn't in Nichiren's writings in a way that is reasonable, fits, scripturally sound, and that we can see in our environment today, I'll listen to you. Nichiren said the same thing. In writing a long treatise called The Opening of the Eyes, he said, unless wise men prove my teachings to be false, I will never yield. Now, the nugget in that sentence, first of all, he's saying two things. I'm not going to yield, no matter what you do. But the other part in there is he said, unless wise men prove my teachings to be false. So he even recognized I could be wrong. Just give me reasonable proof and I will listen to you. He wasn't so arrogant to think, well, I'm not going to hear blah, 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 blah. He was open. He was a true learner, a true teacher, a true seeker of the truth. And that set an example for all of us, not to be so stuck on what we believe that we're not open to learning if we're wrong. Another SGI member sent me multiple just comments accusing me of spreading negativity amongst members, accusing me of being judgmental, accusing me of being delusional, accusing me of being crazy. And then another one wrote me about what I was saying on Facebook and said, shut up, with up in all caps. Now, I must say that person eventually, pretty soon, like the day after, 2 days later, apologized. Okay. And the only reason I'm mentioning what these people said right now is because they're proven that the three powerful enemies will appear, because they're acting exactly like the first powerful enemy. And so an encouraging devotion, the verse section begins actually with the description of the first powerful enemy. So it starts with the practitioners of the Lotus Sutra telling the Buddha, don't worry, when you die, we're going to appear in that evil age and we're going to protect the Lotus Sutra so that we can create an age of peace and harmony in the world. We're going to be the ones to stand up and protect the Sutra. So they say, we beg you not to worry. After the Buddha has passed into extinction, in the age of fear and evil, we will preach far and wide. And here's the first powerful enemy. There will be many ignorant people who will curse and speak ill of us and will attack us with swords and staves. But we will endure all these things. So, again, the behavior of these people who call me all kind of names, they're acting just like the first powerful enemy. And to the person who told me to shut up, he said, in all earnestness, basically, I told you to shut up because you were calling me an enemy. So he was, I defended him. He was reacting out of a sense of, was being defensive. And I'm like, I get it. But if you don't want to be the first powerful enemy, you got two choices. Either insist that you're not like that, read the description of the first powerful enemy and say, that ain't me. I ain't doing that. I'm not cursing and speaking ill of practitioners of the Lotus Sutra. Not me, not me. You can do that. Or you can change your behavior. Because like I said before, these enemies are nothing more than human beings who've given in to their weaker selves. So if you don't want to be the first powerful enemy, take a look at yourself, change what you're doing, investigate what I've been saying, go back to the Lotus Sutra, Nichiren's writings, everything that I put here, go back and read the sources, and then use that as your mirror to see if what I'm saying is true or not true. Worst thing can happen is you're right. But what if I'm right? What if you're contributing to the chaos and the calamities and the COVID-19 and the war, the civil unrest in this country and other countries, the wars around the world, the war that we in the United States could bring on ourselves, which wouldn't be surprising considering what we've done to other nations, the environmental degradation, climate change. Isn't it worth reading the writings from the Lotus Sutra and Nichiren that I've talked about in this video to see if perhaps you're wrong? To conclude, to the person who told me that 40 years ago, if someone had plopped a copy of the Lotus Sutra in his lap, he wouldn't have known what to do with it. And to every SGI member who feels the same way about the Lotus Sutra and about Buddhism in general, I have this to say. After 40 years of study, coherently answering the questions I've been asking, and using Buddhist scripture and examples from the current state of the world to answer them should be more than achievable. But it's impossible to do if you have a blind spot that prevents you from considering all answers, no matter how sound those answers may be. And that's exactly what SGI members have regarding Daisaku Ikeda and the organization. An all-encompassing blind spot.